Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down with a key member of the Bump team, Priya Ramesh, who serves as a marketing and communications manager. Priya is joining us today to discuss, I think, a unique form of storytelling. As our listeners are aware, our podcast is dedicated to the art of storytelling through a diverse range of experiences. And since 2017, Bump, as the Beltline Urban Murals project, has evolved into a citywide street art movement in the Beltline neighborhood of Calgary, Alberta. And it offers a fresh perspective on storytelling through the vibrant art forms of murals. Bump has been instrumental in producing more than 100, I think it's like over 180 captivating artworks that grace walls and buildings in the downtown area. So I'm super excited to talk to Priya, who is a member of the Bump team, and find out more about this organization. Welcome. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled. You know, before we started, I just put a little story out that I was about to record with your organization, and I already had a follower respond with, "Oh my gosh, I love these guys. This is so cool. Can't wait to learn more about them." So I thought, "Oh, this is so cool that there's already feedback coming this way." So you guys are kind of a big deal. I don't know if you know that, but we're going to learn and talk more about that. So how's it going?
It's going well. We're at technically the end of our festival. We're kind of, we operate in August of every year, and it's like a month-long festival. But, our murals are going into September. So we thought the festival would be done, but there's a lot of wrapping up the loose ends. So we're still in the thick of it.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's like a bit risky because we could have snow any day. Like, does the weather impact that as well?
It does, which is why we kind of try to keep it in August.
Yeah.
So like our murals happen in August, ideally. Like things also fall, in the spring and early fall. But the festival timing is based on who's here, what's like the best time to activate a city.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and I feel terrible that and maybe it's worked better this way, meeting with you on the tail end, because I was a little disappointed when I had friends who I'd like to give a shout out to, Nev and Milich, who attended a tour, and you were actually the host. And so they came back and spoke in such high regard, in particular about you. So two things. One was you and how you led that tour, the knowledge, the passion. I think a lot of just personality traits they must have picked up. They just like loved you. And then the second thing was just sort of, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a bit, their findings and like their interest in your whole organization. And the part that I was disappointed in was I was like, how do I not know this? Like, and maybe I'm in my 40s, I'm not cool anymore, but I was talking to a friend and a neighbor about it too. And I was like, how do we not know this? And so this is particularly why I'm really excited today to have you here, because I think you guys are blowing up. Some of us are catching up, but there's a lot of folks in the city that, like me, that I think are sort of pleasantly surprised that something like your organization exists. So before we talk about Bump, though, let's just start with help me connect the dots to sort of like your involvement, what inspired your involvement. Let's learn a little bit about you.
Right. So in Bump, I go by Priya, but in like Calgary artist communities, my name is Contra.
Oh, okay.
So I move pretty robustly in the art scene here. I'm the creative director of an arts collective and production house called Foreigners. So a lot of young BIPOC creatives who are kind of working in film, music, production, fashion, we kind of do the whole thing. We began as an art collective, pivoted during the pandemic into a production house, and kind of really started branching into film, started branching into art installations, public art. So I work in foreigners, and like kind of the other half of my identity is a music project called Cartel Madras. And that's actually how everyone knows me.
Oh.
So kind of through the arts, I work as a filmmaker, a musician, and a curator, kind of working in art production. In 2020, there was a pretty massive mural in Chinatown called The Guide and Protector, and it caused a lot of controversy. It was kind of like a mural that came about during the Black Lives Matters protests, and there is an organization called Pink Flamingo, who's kind of a queer arts entity here. They were looking to program a Black artist to do a mural. And the artist that was selected was my partner, who's in the collective with me, Jay Sterling. So we were given this kind of massive wall in Chinatown. And that was a project that I project managed and kind of, like facilitated logistically. And that project was just so high controversy. It was such a media storm in the city. There was like news, we were being kind of like followed by like rebel media. It was a crazy art project, and it lasted, 2 weeks, but we needed to get full-time security. There was a lot of kind of conversations around politics, race, art. When is a city ready for certain types of art, right? Like that was a big question that kept emerging. But that experience really brought me kind of right into the center of public art. All of a sudden, you're dealing with this high impact, high controversy, massive art project. You're in Chinatown, Calgary. The principal artist is a Black Canadian artist. And then you have this kind of media controversy around, do we need a mural like this, right? And it was interesting. So after that, I think I understand public art, but I think I really understand the role it plays in a city. Quite transformative. So then a year later, there was an opening at Bump, and I applied. I've been kind of working in the art sector, but this public art project, which was through a mural, it really taught me like really quickly like how all this works. So then after that, I kind of got into Bump.
Yeah, that's a wild story. So when you look back and talk about that, and particularly during the work on the mural with your partner, what were you thinking when people were talking about, is it time for art like this? Is this something the city's going to support? Like what was going on for the two of you? Because you're doing it, it's happening, it's going up on a wall while people are saying, so like where were you two at with that?
Yeah, it was so crazy because, I mean, we were lucky enough to have kind of our collective members kind of touching the project, right? So we had like 6 or 7 of us at the wall site working on it in different capacities. He was the principal artist. We had an incredible artist named Katie Green. She's a muralist in the city, pretty big, who was on the project with us as well. And it's so interesting because Calgary is definitely a city. And I mean, all cities are like this, where artists are a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of the way they think. And especially when you work in public art, not necessarily when you work like in a gallery, but when you work in public art, you're kind of working in the nooks and crannies of a city. You see the city, you see where people congregate in a city. You see who has the money in a city, who owns the buildings we get to paint. You see an addictions crisis in a city. You see kind of everything when you work. And I remember for us, we were going from a world of being underground radical artists who played a lot in music and art forms that the audience we cultivate is the audience that comes for it. When you're like this niche underground artist, the people following you and consuming your art are there for you. When you're a public artist, when you suddenly have to do a mural, all of a sudden your audience goes mainstream. And it's very jarring. We went from cultivating and incubating this group of artists and audience members in Calgary who really kind of knew us for our content And then, to suddenly be like, okay, now we're doing this major mural in downtown and people are seeing it who are not from our community. People who are not artists are witnessing the art. Random people walking by the wall, the news, morning television people, a lot of older boomers in Calgary who are maybe not used to seeing artists of color take the stage in a city like Calgary.
The city that they run this town. So,
Totally,
that's
right?
like ooh.
It was that. And it was getting whiplash from going from, oh, we just moved with artists in this kind of underground collective to like, oh, like we must now gauge everyone's opinion on this massive public art piece we're making. So it was quite jarring for everyone. I think it was very jarring for Jay because it was like, he was at the center of it and it's his wall. So he becomes this kind of face of it, right? And when you're like an artist of color painting a mural, you kind of become the ambassador for like your whole race.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you don't even you're not even trying to be, but
yeah, but you're representing. You have one opportunity here, and it's like, how's it going to go? You feel responsible, I would imagine, and on many levels.
Totally. So a lot of pressure too, right? And you're like, oh, is my community standing behind me?
Yeah.
And like, what's going on? And I remember like the media kind of narrative at the time around it was so crazy. It was like, why is there a Black mural in Chinatown? It was nuts. It was literally like white media fictionalizing an angle that like between like different ethnic groups that exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy. But a pretty big chunky experience that we were able to kind of hit the ground running after that in the arts. Like we really like delved into public art after that mural because I think we understood the climate, understood what it would take to move. And, a lot of kind of all of that stuff is something like I bring into Bump and how like, thinking about it like strategically on how we shift as a festival. A lot of those learnings come into Bump Festival.
What do you think it takes to understand that and how that works?
I think being an artist is a helpful step because you understand that, it's always this kind of push and pull between like you're expressing something, but if you're a good contemporary artist, you are kind of thinking about the time we're in, at least a little bit, right? You're kind of responding to it or you're telling people how to respond to it. And I think artists kind of understand how a city works when a city is ready for them, right? Because they have to perform for the city over and over. May it be music, may it be film, may it be, public art, may it be like gallery art, different mediums. But I think like artists kind of understand what it takes. Artists kind of understand when a city starts shifting. And, I can see this with music, like the genre of music I work with it's experimental hip hop and punk. And when we began playing music here, it was not a place for that sort of music. And then we kind of had to carve out the space. And then all of a sudden in 2018, 2019, kind of when we were coming onto the scene, Calgary changed. Like all of a sudden, if you were following kind of Stampede last year and this year, everyone in Stampede was a rapper. Like the headliners.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting to see that. And it was also interesting to hear the feedback. Like you had one side saying, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to go and experience Stampede. This is really cool to have these artists. And then you had another side saying, this is not the Stampede that we sign up for every year. So whenever you see this transition or this shift happening in your community, and Stampede's a really good example of that, you get to decide, where do I want to sit in this? And I think that's the part of the storytelling and having you here today is art is such a universal language, yet many of us struggle with it because we live in a society where it's hard to accept that there are so many different perceptions. Like I love this metaphor of we all stare at that one painting, there's 5-6 of us are going to walk away with 5-6 perceptions. And I love how you talk about this mural that you and Jay are putting on, and even the buzz, because I think all press sometimes can be good press. Like it's good to gauge where the city's at, as we're talking about how do you know the city's ready, and then the sort of response, right? So I think that's a really cool start to this conversation, just sort of your journey. And so you were mentioning before I asked actually I was going to ask you one more thing about the mural before you were about to jump to bump. Maybe you and your partner have talked about this, but maybe, in fairness, he's not here. This is for you. What is one thing that you learned about yourself, or you look back and you reflect that you didn't know about yourself, or you two, maybe each other, after a process like that?
I think the big thing that I kind of understood is, like, I've kind of always known this about myself a little bit, but this was an interesting project because I wasn't the artist.
Yeah.
I was kind of managing the project. But there's a language you develop when you are dealing with controversy, and you are in some ways fielding media, but baiting media. Because there's this point in the journey where you're like, are we going to accept that this is a buzzworthy, crazy story, and let's kind of shoot for the moon here?
Yeah.
Like, let's get eyes on this mural, right? Which we did. We got on Vice. We kind of were, I think for me, like, I think I understand communication and language very intuitively. And I think even wanting to go and join Bump after that, it was kind of like, I understand how a story is told and how a story is created, sometimes out of nothing. So a really good so we were filming the whole time while we were doing this mural. And then around a year after this mural, kind of under Foreigners, we released a documentary series called Dispatches from the Calgary Underground. And I can send you a link to it. But episode 1 of it was called The Wall, and it was just about the mural. So we had like 7 episodes, each episode about a different underground artist shaking the current in the city, which I think would be very like relevant to your podcast.
As I'm writing this down.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Please.
But so episode 1, let's do the episode 1 about Jay's mural and call it The Wall. And it will be a 15-minute episode about him, what we recorded, the whole story. So I really my takeaway from that was, I love to tell stories about other artists. Like, I can see through the mist, and I can see what's going on in the center of it. And I think that carried on towards Bump. It's carried on towards my work as a filmmaker within Foreigners. It's how I really interact with other artists. I can see their story and I can see what's happening. I think for my partner, it was like an extremely triggering experience.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because it's like, I come away from being like, I'm a documentary film.
I'm going to go apply for another job here.
Totally, right? And he was like, we always talk about this. He's like, it's so crazy that after that, you were like, I'm going to work for Bump.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm going to become a shut-in for 6 months.
Oh, man.
Right. But it was really scary because we did have right-wing trucks circling our mural site. We had to get literally 24-hour security because we were painting like not even a political mural. It was just a mural with 2 Black people.
I know, man. The thing is, when you talk, it's like you're trying to convince me and whoever you've told this story so many times. And it's a sad thing is you have to say it because people respond with that still happens. And I hear you, man. And I think I am not surprised. Sadly, I'm not. I'm more surprised that you guys finished your process. You started this and that in itself is like an applause, because many people of color would not, I don't think, be able to, without a community and support behind them, be able to do what you two were doing, what your whole team was doing. And I think it's a door opener for a lot of people. Yeah. And you made such a good point earlier when you said it's like you got to carve out the space. And, I've had a few people of color on recently that are artists in sort of different ways who have said exactly that in their own kind, thoughtful, non-argumentative way of, you know what, you can't ask for something that you're not going to get, but you can also create your own space. It's okay, right? So I think good for you guys to do that. But, even for your partner to kind of go into lockdown mode for a little bit, it was, I would imagine, quite a reflective time for him for, on a personal level for sure.
Totally. Totally. It was. Even now it's so he did a bump mural in 2022. And we're usually like filming BTS as artists are going, and his kind of stipulation was you cannot reveal the address till I'm done.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, man.
In complete private. If people come by, that's fine, but you can't announce where I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's believable. That's wild. Have you had other artists through Bump talk like that too? Because you guys like are local, national, and international artists, right? We're talking about anyone and everyone that's part of this team.
Yeah.
So people come with very different experiences, I would imagine.
Totally. They do. I think like something that I would say like right now within Bump, there's a lot of people touching the organization who are an artist themselves or within the artistic community, right? Not just, I would say, like festival organizers. A lot of the people who are making key decisions within the festival outside of Bump, they work in the arts. So there's this kind of understanding, I think, that this era of Bump, I'd say from 2021 onwards, it's very, we kind of operate to protect the artist as well. We want to be the line of contact, like media comes to us. You do not go to the artist. And it's funny because you have to think about, so that Punjabi protest mural, that's a really good segue into this conversation and this thing about artists and what they say. That mural was supposed to go somewhere else. And that building owner saw the design and they're like, too political for me, no.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was the project manager on that mural. So I had to scramble to find another wall. And luckily, there was another building we had as backup who was like, oh, I'd love this political mural. And I wonder what would have happened if that mural was on the front of a street and not behind, facing on, right?
Because it was on the back of Jameson's pub on 17th Ave, right? Yeah.
Which is a really nice spot. It's very visible, but it's not.
It's right by Popeye's Chicken, right?
Yeah. It's still not opposite to City Hall.
Yes.
Or in like a more, in a cluster of condos.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to think about this as a festival when we're programming walls. What belongs where? What design can go on which building and which alleyway and which front? Sometimes you play with, like there was a mural that we did in 2021 by a Toronto artist named Kersha Wright. She's a Jamaican artist. And she did a mural, which was a portrait of Violet King, who is the first Black female lawyer in Canada. And that lawyer is also from Calgary originally. And it's interesting because you have this artist from Toronto coming to Calgary and telling us about our city with her mural. Mm-hmm. Like she's going, I'm going to do this mural about this like incredible woman from your city. Mm-hmm. And I bet no one here really knows that.
No, I didn't know until I saw the mural that my friends, because they took a picture of that one and we talked about that one, and it's a very large picture as well. It's pretty big, right? Like it's in your face. Yeah.
And that was a mural where you think about it and you're like, okay, this mural really should go in a high impact zone. Mm-hmm. You want this mural, you want people to see it and be like, what is this? Who is this? Look it up, learn about the history of their city. Sometimes you deliberately choose to kind of reveal information by where you place a mural. And sometimes you want something, it will court too much controversy.
Yeah.
And the artist might not be ready for that kind of controversy, especially in a city like Calgary, where people are very vocal, very loud about public art. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right artist to go in certain areas of the city.
Yeah, and I would imagine, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because there is a process. You have a team of jurors. Is that the jury, right? They sort of help decide sort of stuff, and you're gonna talk a little bit about that. But I would imagine that another sort of barrier could be that also, as you had mentioned, or the building owner isn't interested in that. So you have like the artist to protect, you have the story that you're trying to unleash and get out, and then you have the location, which are all parties going to agree to this?
Exactly. Like the building owner, has to say yes to the design before it goes up, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. They kind of have to say yes or no. The
Yeah.
building owner can tell us what to paint, but they can, once the artist has been selected, they say yes first to that. And then you see the design and it's like, yes, no.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people involved in the process before I think a mural goes up. Because what people, I always get questions from people and they're like, why don't you paint this? And it's like, interesting question. We never tell. I think one of the big things about our festival that really sets us apart from other festivals is we don't really do commissions. We never tell the artist what to paint. If we're telling them what to paint, it's a special case scenario. They've been hired on for a special project, like a random one-off. But most of the murals you see, that's just coming from the artist. They were selected for their style, for their practice, for their experience. We kind of know what they're going to give us, and then they'll kind of design something based off the wall size and whatnot, and then it'll just go through a yes/no approval process.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I'm happy to hear that that's part of the process and the artist is sort of taking the lead because they are telling a story, and it would be so heartbreaking for someone to tell me that my story can't be said in the way that I've seen it, right? Like someone telling me that I'm wrong with that. So you started to talk a little bit about Bump. Help us understand about Bump. So Bump started out in 2017. We're like, 5 years in now? So can you please tell us about the story that led to the origin of the Bump Festival and where you've come to?
Yeah. So Bump Festival begins in 2017. It started by Peter Oliver and Peter Shriver. And Peter Shriver is an urban planner. Peter Oliver, who's still a part of Bump, he's our president, kind of works in the arts community, kind of lover of public art. And you can find him like in CADA and Slut Island and all the kind of things. So these two start in 2017. I think the idea is going off, if you've seen other mural festivals in Canada, like you see Murals in Montreal, Van Mural Fest in Vancouver, there are these kind of big mural festivals. I think that's used as kind of a starting point, as a model on how do we create a festival that is two-sided, right? On one side, or I think the heart and soul of Bump is you're programming public art in a city. And then while you're programming public art, you're also kind of activating the city through arts and culture and music, right? And so like Bump stands for the Beltline Urban Renewal Project. At the beginning, it's how do we think about the Beltline differently? How do we think about our urban spaces differently? How do we make this a city that's more interesting, more art-centric, more beautiful? Those are all, I think, questions that
More inclusive.
More inclusive, more diverse, definitely better looking. How do we do that? And 2017 Calgary, it's so crazy because Calgary just looks so different because of these murals. And we have upwards of, just in terms of pure mural installations, maybe like 130 now.
Wow.
So it's a lot. And we've expanded past the Beltline. But the core of it is urban planning, urban renewal, city structures, using buildings as a canvas, using murals to have macro changes in a city. What conversations do you start with a mural? What industry can you start when public art becomes more present? Because then more artists are like, oh, this city's warming up to art. Like, I can stay. I can actually start my business here. I can start my initiative here. I can throw that party here. So that's kind of how Bump starts. I'm sure like first year of the festival is like 4 murals and the second year is like 7 murals. And then, you see this explosion happen during pandemic. Interesting, because most festivals really have a dip in the pandemic. But I think for us, it's weird because I guess public art and programming solo painters onto these big walls is one of the only things in a art standpoint that you could do during COVID. Can't really have a big music festival.
Yeah.
you can't really do all the other fun things.
Yeah.
Somehow our model, which is like, oh no, like you can fly here and you can paint your mural and you don't have to worry about everyone else.
Right.
It's just you. Somehow we're able to create and program art still during the pandemic, and it kind of explodes. 20 and then 2021 and 2022, and now we're in 2023, and it's like only growing more and more and more. But that's kind of like the core of Bump Festival.
So would you say that, you mentioned COVID, would you say there was a difference of how artists painted, how they use the building as their canvas prior to COVID than maybe after COVID? Yeah, you're saying yeah.
I think so. And I say this as someone who had to curate and program a lot during COVID. I worked as the curator for Arts Commons for a year, and it was 2021 to 2022. And we had to kind of think of a theme for the year. And I remember our theme was new architects in a liminal time, which is we're in this in-between era where pre-pandemic, we're not in post-pandemic yet. We don't really know what's going to happen. So we're in an elevator and we don't know where it's going. But there is an opportunity to shift how the city looks and feels, right? And a lot of the artists in different disciplines, you really hear it in music and you see it in film. There's a lot of pandemic-driven art happening. With murals, I found in my head when I'm like talking about these murals, like I do this kind of thing where I'm like pre-pandemic bump murals, post-pandemic bump murals. And there's a kind of strange almost, I would almost say that murals that happened during the pandemic veer between fantastic, very imaginative, almost I want to take you out of your reality and like bring you into a new one.
So like more abstract, would you say? Like fluid?
Abstract, or like I would say very, I think the word I would use is a lot of surrealism, a lot of fantasy, a lot of myth, a lot of folklore.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of magic. People really thinking of other worlds, right? Like other dimensions, going back into like high fantasy. I saw a lot of that. And then on the other hand, also a lot of portraiture. So like a return to human connection.
Yeah.
Really focusing on people. Let's talk about people. Let's talk about moments that people are in. Those were the two things that I saw really take off. A third type of very popular muralism that, I didn't really see much of during pandemic is like landscape. And it would make sense as to why, right? Like, it's like you really think about what people are feeling and like people feel isolated, people feel the importance of human connection. And then on the other hand, I would say this about a lot of the artists that like I move with, tinkering with a lot of absurdist, otherworldly, futuristic, strange concept. You're in this kind of dystopian time.
Yeah.
I think dystopian era is a big one. Like a lot of the work that, like we started doing within Foreigners is very magical realism, very surrealist, kind of playing with cyberpunk future. Those kind of ideas will come to the fore because, you're in this like dystopian time. And I remember like 2020 in Calgary, the streets were empty. You're just driving around. Like I would drive around a lot because I just moved back from Toronto. I got stuck here.
Oh, is that how we kept you and you stayed?
Yeah. I had like just moved it to Toronto a year ago, flew back here, got stuck here during quarantine. And, there was a lot of driving around in like the vast open prairies. A lot of people were going back into nature. That's a big one. I mean, it gets a little bit weird, but there's quite a burst of artists really like, there's kind of I would say we're circling back to this era of psychedelics being very big in art.
Yeah.
A lot of our muralists too, like they'll kind of hint at it with their mural. That kind of explorative, looking into self, psychedelic, experimental theme.
Yeah.
Also quite abundant during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that that's really fitting, I think, and maybe even for people listening, I think it resonates because when you connect it to self during COVID, you talk about all of these different genres that artists are visiting, this fantasy and sort of like this other dimension, and you also mention opportunities. And I think for a lot of us humans, that was what was happening, was a lot of exploration of, why am I doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it? Do I need to be working this job? Like, I'm one of the ones that left my job after these sort of life changes, and a lot of people sort of trying to reignite the light within that dims, I think, over time. And so it's really cool. And also psilocybin, right, is on the cusp of becoming legalized. There's all doctors starting to experiment. So it's really interesting. You said, artists, you guys are a couple steps ahead when times are changing in our society. So it's interesting that you link those, and I'm think, oh yeah, that makes sense, because that's sort of what sometimes we don't realize when things are happening as we're in the midst of it. And when you step out, I think it's nice to be able to reflect and compare that, even in the world of an artist telling a story, and the world of me living in my house. There's so many parallels in how we all experience the pandemic. And I think opportunity is like a really wonderful way of saying some of the things that people had to go through, but at the same time, we went through them. And hopefully for many of us, it's taught us that we're resilient, and maybe being in our houses aren't so bad after all. Okay, so I'm gonna pause for a sec, and I'm gonna jump into the middle fingers segment with you, because otherwise I'm gonna keep asking you about Bump and you, and I want to make sure we get an opportunity to do this. So I would love to know what you brought today, what you want to put your middle fingers up to. Also, can I see your middle fingers? Or do you have them tattooed? Oh, okay, you're one. Because I was like, your hand with your red nails is very like similar to my logo.
Yeah. I wanted to get, I've been thinking about getting foreigners tattooed to my fingers, but everyone I talk to is like, it'll fade. So
whatever,
we'll see.
Do it, and then I can get a real live action shot of my logo through you. Yeah, seriously, with the red nails there. Yes, I love it. Do it. They all fade anyway. Who cares? Right?
I know, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Our skin is inclined to the whole fading. You gotta redo it anyway, right?
Yeah. I like how the hand tattoos look quite a lot.
Yeah, I do too. That was a good, I felt, ambassador when you started seeing it on her fingers. I was like, oh, I like this.
Yeah. Oh, no, totally.
What do yours represent? Because I see some animals. Do I see like...
So I have a tiger here, and I have like a serpentine dragon, and then I have a lot of serpent tattoos.
Yeah, oh my God. Which is like my phobia.
Really?
Yes. So now I'm so intrigued by you even more.
I have a lot of big serpent tattoos, and the album we released under my like music project is called The Serpent and the Tiger. So there's quite a lot of that symbolism. Me and my sister. Yeah, I'll send you.
Can you please? Because I'm writing all this down.
I'll send you an email with documentary, Vice article, foreigner stuff.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is my middle finger? Is that the question? What is my middle finger towards?
Yes.
I think my middle finger goes towards people in positions of power in the arts who are not involved in said art form. So, and I think that goes for Canada. Because, and I say this as someone who works in the arts, but is in the arts, right? So like, how can you make decisions about, music and like music festivals and who should get money and how a show should look and feel if your friends are not musicians?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I notice this quite a lot in Canada, where there's still a lot of people in positions of power in like entertainment, in art. You're not even in the community. Like you're not friends with people who you're trying to service.
But so you have money, probably.
You have money, or I don't know, you're like a juror on like a granting body. But it's like, if you don't know the people that you're trying to kind of figure out where power should move or how money should move, it defeats me how you would know what to do with it. It's like, if you were a festival organizer who never goes to festivals,
Yeah.
it would be weird, right? And
Totally.
I
Yeah.
have that would be my big kind of like, I would love for that to change. I think the more people who are involved in like the arts sector, who are artists or are friends with artists and kind of are in the kind of in that scene, I think it becomes better. I think you really understand
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
things should look good.
Yeah, because like what I hear you saying is when you work in a field like yours, the arts field, that's about experiential teaching and learning. You have to experience it to be able to get it, to understand it, and even I think be part of producing it in the means of like being part of. I'm imagining when you talk, you're thinking of some of the people on the board or the jurors that maybe people aren't always connected with the work being done. It's always like this weird top and bottom
Exactly.
thing, not to put artists at the bottom, because I don't agree that that's the case, but that's how it becomes. The workers are at the
Totally.
bottom and we're at the top, and there's often a disconnect in, I work for not-for-profit for years.
Imagine if the bump jury was full of people who like just yesterday found out what a mural was. And I see this quite a lot, and it's quite alarming because it's like, unless you're really in it and doing this every day, you don't even know what's good. You don't even know who deserves this or
Yeah,
that,
yeah. Yeah, you have,
right?
it's totally. Yeah, it's like you said, it's only emerged from underground and in a way of being accepted. I mean, you think about, right, you and I talked on the phone, like many people's understanding of murals and art is, oh my gosh, graffiti back in the day, illegal, bad, you're not allowed to do it. And so in just even your genre of the murals and the work you guys are doing, yeah, I would imagine that that's challenging because you also need those people to help sell the story. And so how do you sell the story if you're not connected to it, right? As well, if you're trying to get people to agree to allow this piece of controversial art to be on a wall. I like that one. I'm going to join you with that. Do you feel like in the arts and entertainment world, like where do you feel your sort of field sits in such a, and I don't know if this is fair to ask, so please tell me if I shouldn't be asking this, but like in a conservative city, like, or, province in particular, right? In a conservative province. So would you say that there is equalism there, or you think there's like, it's like a fight to do the work you're doing, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think that weird, strange, radical art, different art, unique art is necessary for a city to grow. And I think the best parts of the city are really the weird things that come out of it. And I think of a city like Calgary, and I choose to stay in a city like Calgary because I think we do have a really weird underground, right? Like we're this prairie landlocked city, and then once a year everyone kind of cosplays as like a cowboy.
We party,
and,
yeah.
right, and but even that
Yeah.
is so absurd but interesting from the standpoint of just looking at the city big picture. The city's really weird, and we also have this interesting spike in diaspora in the past 2 decades, right? Like you have all these immigrants who move here during like a certain boom,
Mhm.
right? And their kids are now growing up
Mhm.
and are in their 20s and 30s and 40s and are finally in positions of power with a little bit more
Mhm.
agency. So Calgary is also this interesting city where we're seeing the first of people of color kind of reaching for those art spaces,
Mhm.
which hasn't happened before, right?
Mhm.
Like there's no way my mom would be like, even though she would work in the community, there's no way I'm gonna like make a career out of this and
No.
like really make it
Well,
artistically.
there's no place for our
Mhm.
parents and any immigrants that came here, it's so, I love that you brought it up because so many guests, we go there, they bring it up, we talk about this, and a shout out to that generation that had to come and survive. And because they had to survive, we now, first generation, born and raised here, we get to do the thriving part. And I'm
Exactly.
right. Like I get to be a step further with my kids, and hopefully the next step is the integration, right? Because sometimes it feels like the space is there because we created it, but we have to stay in our space.
Totally. That's what you want to find pathways out. You want to create organizations and initiatives that kind of fold into the mainstream. You don't want to stay underground, right?
Totally.
Like you want it to become mainstream. You want it to become boring. Like you want murals in Calgary to become so normal, right?
Yeah.
In the way it would be in any great art city, right? Like you want it to be a part of the blueprint of the city. Like it feels like a part of the city. And same with, the idea that like filmmakers and musicians and writers and all these different types of creatives could be in the city should become normal. People should be like, right, like that would happen in my city.
Okay, I'm going to put my middle fingers up too. I'm gonna talk about, and you probably heard this, the recent news of the public figure, the actor that was sentenced to 30 years of prison because he was found guilty 2 counts of, I believe, with rape. And so, this when this is so public, as you kind of talked a little bit about this actually in the beginning with you and Jay in the mural. People have feelings, thoughts, and all sorts of things. I'm just more, thinking about when a topic like assault and rape comes out, and particularly about those people where it's like very anxiety inducing. People are watching, learning, hearing, and, revisiting a personal connection to the situation. So I'm thinking about those folks, and sexual abuse and rape, sexual assault, I just want to say is not rare. And I think as a society, we handle it like it is rare. So when you have to have a public figure go through a process like that for people to start to be educated and take seriously, I think it's kind of worrisome that it takes something like that for many people to be like, oh yeah, that's on my mind too. So the thing I'm putting my middle fingers in particular up to is the word betrayal. I think betrayal carries a weight and depth of emotion that sometimes is difficult for people to put into words. And because it's a betrayal of trust, and you feel betrayed by a sacred bond that was unbreakable, betrayal of a person you believed you knew. People are like writing letters on behalf of this actor, this guy. Famous people wrote these letters, character references, right, of how awesome he is and all these things. But I think the thing that when these situations such as assault and rape happen, I think the betrayal that we struggle with most is our own instincts. Like, how did I, betrayal of my own judgment or my own heart? Like, how did I trust this person? How crazy am I to think that, I would write this letter on his behalf and think that he wouldn't get charged. So I just want to say to people that are revisiting feelings of betrayal right now that does not define your entirety of your relationship or the capacity to love and trust again. And I just want to encourage people that if this big thing that's in the media is making you feel something, I really encourage you to visit what that is. And sometimes with a therapist is a good place to start, but also there's lots of people out here that are willing to talk and listen. So I just want to encourage that in particular. So that's where my middle fingers is going to betrayal. But that's me. Do you think that though, like, when things like this sort of come out, you even touched on it with the mural at the beginning. Are there sort of like the media, like the kind of like the spin that the media can have, right? Like you even think of the Amber and the Johnny Depp case, things that people put out there. So I like, what do you think about the media's role and responsibility in something like this?
Yeah, I find modern journalism very interesting because on one hand, I think we need more journalists in the arts, but we need more journalists in the arts. So we need more people talking about the arts. We need more people I think Canadian journalism has become a little bit of a exercise in fluff pieces. There's a lot of this artist just released this. Like there's no real let's really get into it here and talk about what this is doing, talk about what it means. There's a real lack of that. And I think that's because there's like so little money in journalism. I also think who the journalists are shifting, right? Like right now, I would say YouTube creators, podcasters, TikTok, that's where people are kind of speaking in real time about something, almost like it's the news. I find that for a city to really kind of grow, you need people talking about the stories in the city in real time.
Yeah.
That's like a whole nother conversation. But I think when it comes to public art, I think, yes, daytime media needs to be extremely cognizant of what's going on. I found the way the media spun the whole story in Chinatown was so crazy because I was, like we're in the middle of this Black Lives Matter protest and you don't realize that you're endangering this artist by your spin. You don't realize the detrimental effect you are having on two communities in this city, right? Like that was pretty crazy. So that did feel like, I was like, wow, this is you can't even control the narrative. You try to control the narrative, but you can't, right? Even media, like who you choose to interview, right? Like you can be like, this person's an expert. And it's just like some guy off the street who's like, I don't like this mural. And I anticipate like we just kind of wrapped a really big mural that we have like an unveiling party for on Friday. It's public, so you should come if you're free. That one is a big mural on the Beltline and quite out there, quite experimental. I have a feeling that one's going to get it's going to be very polarizing because it's not a mural of mountains or a bear. It's like a mural of this humanoid, futuristic, ancient creature. And it's a big mural, so you can't miss it. And the artist is from Colombia. So I have a feeling it's going to be a interesting exercise in seeing that mural is very much like we're pushing the city with that mural. We're trying to be like, let's get some very interesting art out there. Yeah, like I wonder how people will talk about it. I wonder what people will say. I'm sure, there's conversations around, did you consult the neighborhood?
So like,
you know what I mean?
When these things come out, what's your organization's hope in the community's response? What is the hope? What do you guys hope in how the artist and the mural will be received?
I mean, I think our hope is always the mural is received well. And there's a difference between, does this make my neighborhood pretty? And does this make my neighborhood great? I think those are two different questions. Does this make me think? I think my own perspective and opinion on public art and art is that it can act as a portal. It can kind of suspend its audience in like a new reality for even a second. These things can be these portals. In this case, we're talking about murals. It can be quite dramatic. It can be quite revealing. It can be quite transformative, especially in a city like Calgary. So I feel like for me, I'm always hoping murals start a conversation. You ask questions about the artist. You ask questions about the art. I find murals have the capacity to be quite transformative in an instant on how you see yourself in the future, right? I think how you respond to a piece of art is very revealing about you. And sometimes public art is a way to Trojan horse new ideas to the public. That could be through a portrait, that could be through something that you've never seen. And it can be something as simple as you're just seeing like colored bodies on a wall and they're big and they're massive and they're taking up space. What effect will that have on you mentally to see that? What effect will that have if you've never seen that before? Like, how will that shift your future?
Yeah, totally. How do you think bump plays a role in mental health and well-being of the community?
I have heard that it's so interesting because like I think public art overall, I think being in a city that you like to look at is going to have a pretty profound effect on your mental health. I was in London last fall and I remember, London's an old city, but you're walking around beside all these like ancient monuments all the time. And you're like, this is crazy. Like to kind of grow up in a city like this where you get to see these iconic historical buildings all around you. What does it do to your taste? What does it do for how you can imagine the future of your city? And I think in Calgary, we're not this ancient city. One thing we have on default all the time is we have mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this kind of interesting portal of its own. But I think what Bump is trying to do is architect the city from the inside through art. It's to kind of create that kind of wow moment when you're walking to work, you go through an alley, you turn a corner and you turn around and you see this like 5,000 square foot mural. And you're like, what did I just see? What is it that I feel now on my morning commute? I think that has pretty massive impacts on mental health. And then, on the other hand, I wonder what all the time, what having accessible art can do, because art changes people. You go to a gallery, you go to a museum, and you see art, and you see the very interesting ideas that can only exist in those spaces. And then you think about who gets to see those installations, who gets to be inside those galleries. The thing with Bump is the city is the gallery.
Yeah.
So you get to put it outside. And then I think the more interesting people you curate into painting murals, the more interesting conversations your public can have. People who typically cannot access art are now seeing these massive installations from artists around the world, new ideas, new characters, new stories. It enriches their life.
Yeah. And I think it enriches our communities, because you had mentioned the Still I Rise mural by the three Punjabi girls. It was sort of them standing alongside of the farmers that were protesting, and they all were connected to this protest because they had connection to the farming community back in India. And one of them, when I was reading up on them, I really loved how she said, it's also helps you in a community form identity, because there's a lot of us here that are of color. And when you get to walk by a mural that is massive and overwhelming, but the person looks like you, like that's identity building times a billion that I never would have seen as a little girl walking anywhere. And I always joke about that's how I got my white girl complex. And having young people now to take my kids for them to see representation from different cultures. And I think that's the piece that you guys as an organization do so well, is this inclusive community of welcoming cultures and stories that many people, I think, would just scroll past on social media, because there's so many stories on social media to be part of. So my question to you is if we can talk a little bit about how these, you did mention it earlier, but just how these murals get picked and how the stories get sort of decided. So you have a jury for the Bump Festival, right? It's like local artists, members of various Alberta art, right?
Yeah.
Like all sorts of different community people. So how do they go through the selection process, and how as an artist do I also submit to you? Like, how does this work?
So our festival applications open in January, and the applications stay open for about a month and a half. We kind of announce it online. We send it off everywhere, and artists are applying with their portfolios. And once the applications close, then we have kind of a jury that, as of now, changes every year. And one of the jury members could be a Bump alumni, people from the community who are in the art sector, other artists, community leaders, tight-knit jury, like 6 to 7 people. And essentially they're assessing every single application and figuring out the yeses, nos, maybes. There's kind of like, a matrix system that we use to kind of calculate these numberings. And then there's obviously ample opportunity, because we're assessing these applications over a couple months. It takes a really long time. For context, over 600 people applied to Bump in 2020.
That's awesome. Wow.
And we're trying to like trickle it down into 16 to 17 murals from 600. So that's quite big. So we create a long list first of maybe 40 artists. And then we go and look at all the buildings, right? It's kind of this dance between segmenting our funding, figuring out buildings, because not all murals are the same amount of money. Like
Yeah.
if you have a bigger wall, it's more money. Some murals are privately funded. So there's this whole like song and dance over money, buildings, artist. And let's say we kind of so let's say we long list 20 buildings. Those buildings are then going to get a kind of deck of their own with a few artists that we think makes sense for their building. They're not going to get 40 artists. They're going to get 5. And then like all of these buildings are going to get like 5 to 6 based on wall shape, size, yada, yada, yada. Then the building is on back to us with kind of like a yes, no, maybe so. And then we're doing another matrix, right? And then finally, like you hit this kind of these 15 buildings and these 15 artists now pair really well together. We're trying to give everyone their first option.
Right.
We're trying to give artists who are quite experienced or flying in from elsewhere bigger walls for sure, or like walls that work with their experience, right? Like if you're an artist who typically does portraits, we're trying to give you a portrait shaped wall. If you're likes to do wide alley canvas, that's the type of wall we're trying to pair you with. So we're trying to kind of think of you, also think of the material you paint on, right? The wall material matters based on who you are. After that, then we make our offers. And then things can change. Artists can cancel, buildings can pull out, funding can shift. So you want backup walls. And then, you have a short list of 40 artists who, like, in an ideal world, we get to paint 40 murals, but we typically will get to paint about 16.
And what about upkeep? So how does that work? You have an artist that paints a mural, and then what happens?
The building owns it after. So they kind of steward the mural, which, so one thing we do after all our murals are painted is we have a coating of anti-graffiti that goes on it. So if something gets tagged, you can remove the tag and the mural will still be intact.
Perfect.
But, we kind of have contracts with buildings that asks for them to steward the murals. So if graffiti happens, they kind of have to go and ensure that it's removed.
Does that happen often, graffiti?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not in like a wild way, but things get tagged, right? Like things get tagged and different muralists have different perspectives on tagging.
Oh, interesting.
Like some muralists who, come from the graffiti community kind of understand that, like, once you paint something in a city, it's part of the city. Anything can happen to it, and it's fine. Some people are much more like precious about their work and which I understand, right? Like you've spent days doing this like multi project. You want to make sure that it's not being defaced. So it's like one thing for a small tag on the corner. It's another thing for someone's face to be tagged.
Right. Yeah. So how long does it take an artist usually?
We give artists about 7 to 8 days.
That seems like nothing.
I know. But they're working full time on a wall. And
how many hours is that a day though? Like what's full time? 8 hours, 10 hours, forever?
Like they're kind of, it's up to them.
They do it.
Schedule, and it kind of is determined by wall size. So like a behemoth wall, which is over 3,000 square feet, it's going to probably take you 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But like a medium, small to mid-sized wall, 7 days. And artists can usually 7 days.
Do some of the artists solely paint these murals all by themselves, or do they often have a team helping them?
It's usually solo or with one assistant.
Okay. That's crazy, man.
Unless you're painting. Last year we painted the Dime mural, which was like the tallest mural in the world. So that needed people on that wall. We painted Neoma, which is like the biggest mural in Alberta. Again, her plus 3 assistants. When you work on a lift, you can work alone. But when you work on swing stages, you have to have assistants. You need someone on the swing stage with you.
Wow.
So wall size, your experience, all of that determines if you're working solo or with people.
Right. Wow, that's crazy. Also, I hear Bump is promoting safety through the visual arts community. There's like this whole little article on you guys about taking initiative and painting like a bunch of the concrete barriers.
Yeah, Jersey barriers. So that's our roadwork program. Our summer is murals, and then spring we do roadworks, and we program typically local artists only for that. It's just a way for people to kind of get their fingers dirty with public art,
Right.
to kind of, you're painting these weird structures, you're going to see them. It's very transient. So we do the roadworks program with the city of Calgary.
I feel like I can keep asking you so many questions. Is there anything that you wish I had asked you today that maybe we didn't talk about or that you wanted to share? Because there's so many things that we can be talking about right now with your organization.
Honestly, I think the only thing that I would say is I would highlight that Bump is we're a small arts org and we're not funded by the city and we're not funded by a government body and we're not really funded by any massive thing. Bump is still an organization trying to find its sustainability long term. I think it's very much an organization that is required for a city.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to think about that when it comes to arts orgs, that arts orgs need funding. The people who work in the arts need funding. They need a salary to be able to do their job. And how do we fund the arts when, what we're doing is making these crazy installations in a city, really changing what the city looks like, what the city feels like, who will stay in a city. I think those are big things that Bump is doing. And one of my goals is how do we make sure we're sustainable?
Yeah. So is there anything the organization is looking or hoping for in terms of donations? And if so, like where can people reach out? Where's the best place?
I feel like if there's opportunities for funding or grants or even just different kind of initiatives that Bump could join with, you can reach out to us on email. You can reach out to me at creative@beltlineyyc.ca or Ryan, our festival and events manager, info@beltlineyyc.ca. We're always open to having conversations to figure out like how can we bridge more gaps in the community.
We'll also put that up when we post your episode as well. Okay, so maybe you can do a little call to action for us. What is one thing that you really hope our listeners, if it's only one thing, what should they take from sitting with you today?
I hope that your listeners today think about public art differently in a city. See them as vehicles that could court change, joy, dialogue, controversy. I think that public art has an instantaneous, transformative, exhilarating kind of power in a city. And I think it can really change the way people play in a city, people live in a city, people work in a city, and the way people stay in a city. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like one of the big things we're trying to do with Bump.
Really well said. I appreciate that. I really want to thank you for coming on and spending some time with me today. You gave me a lot of time. You were really quick to book this conversation. My friends that visited with you were also really grateful that Bump brought such an opportunity to our community in the way that you folks have. I'm really hoping folks will check you guys out. I know for sure now I'm prepared for next year. Can't wait. For our listeners, just want to thank you guys so much for supporting as well. These conversations are door openers. So if there's anything that you want to add or ask, you know where to find us. Thank you again, Priya, for coming on. Have a good one. Have a great week.
Thank you.